50,000 years in the making. Australia has been built on heroes and heart. Explorers, builders, and the brave. The country has been forged in war and peace, discovery and invention, adversity and triumph. This is the story of Australia. 1837, Portland, 500 kilometres east of Adelaide. 3 convicts on the run, only 1 horse between them. John Foley, thief, brawler, desperate. Yet he will help save South Australia, the only colony to reject convicts entirely. And he'll show the free settlers they need the guts and tenacity of bushwise outlaws.
On one level, Foley is a fugitive from justice. He's an escaped convict, so he's trying to get as far away as he possibly can. On another level, he's a man on the make. He's got wanderlust, and he loves keeping on going.
Less than 50 years on from the first fleet, free settlers now outnumber convict arrivals. Many come to seek their fortune. Some will find it in wool. Light and easy to transport, it will clothe Europe's millions and make rich men of the free settlers who become squatters.
Squatters were the pioneers of the wool industry, builders of modern Australia, and our prosperity rode on the sheep's back for a long time.
These squatters have what Foley needs: fast horses.
Let's go around and take the horses. A horse is equivalent today of a car. It's like having your car stolen, but there was no insurance. So if you had your horse stolen, it was like a year's salary had gone.
Single-handedly, Foley takes on the squatters, distracting them while his mates make a play for the thoroughbreds.
Girls, get your guns!
Don't touch him!
Ha! Ha! Horse!
On their stolen horses, the outlaws ride more than 500 kilometres, all the way to South Australia.
Foley does what no other white man has ever done before. He finds a way from the new settlements on the coast of Port Phillip and Victoria through to Adelaide in South Australia.
They are also the first Europeans to see some of the most fertile land on the continent: Victoria's Western Plains.
The great thing about the Western Plains that Foley saw was that there was no need to clear them. There they were, laid out, abundant winter rainfall, good grass, well-watered country. There was food in abundance. It was, in some senses, a paradise.
Foley's journey will change the fate of South Australia. Adelaide, 1838. South Australia is less than 2 years old. It's established as Australia's only convict-free zone and a place of religious freedom. In time, these dusty streets will become known as the City of Churches. But these free settlers will need more than faith to survive. Foley has fallen out with his mates. He comes here in the hope of starting a new life. But amongst these good citizens, a new face stands out. Until recently, Adelaide saw no need for a police force. But as men begin to arrive from the penal colonies, they recruit one.
Police, what's your business in town?
My business is none of your business.
Put the gun down.
For pulling a gun on a copper, Foley faces the death penalty. But he's not alone with his troubles. In the driest colony, on the driest inhabited continent, farms are failing and food is scarce. The free settlers don't have the skills to survive here.
You think of the difficulties of clearing the land. You think of the difficulties of fencing the land and then managing stock. These are all skills that these people didn't necessarily have. They won't have convicts, so who is going to provide the labour force? Who is going to feed them?
South Australia's acting governor is George Stephen. He knows the colony's survival depends on knowledge of the land and the bush skills of men like Foley. He's also heard the convict has discovered fertile land.
If I spare your life, you will need to work for me.
The governor and Foley strike a deal. In exchange for his life, Foley must drive desperately needed stock along the path he pioneered while on the run.
Adelaide would have died the slow and painful death that prospected Sydney Cove in the early years without those incredibly brave and adventurous men moving huge droving mobs of cattle and sheep to the Adelaide markets. That is what made it possible for them to keep on going.
They are the people that set this country up. They may have been convicts, but that doesn't mean that they were not capable of doing the most amazing things.
With the help of convicts and ex-convicts, the colonies expand. Armies of stockmen, squatters and their families spread across Australia. Along stock routes, like those forged by Foley, sprout the first inland towns, including Mount Gambier, Seymour and Goulburn. Within 50 years, 100 million sheep will support a population of 3 million people. Wealth flows along the stock routes to the cities, delivering one of the highest standards of living in the world. But the oldest continuous cultures on Earth stand in the way of the colony's rapid expansion. Just as Pemulwuy did at Parramatta over 40 years ago. The first Australians fight back. Eventually, they are driven from the lands most valuable to the booming colonies. Their battle to regain what they lose continues to this day. British ships have been bringing colonists to Australia for 54 years. Nearly 200,000 migrants now call Australia home, but only 1 in 3 is a woman. 1842, Sydney. Caroline Chisholm, mother of 3, social engineer, desperate to save 17-year-old Flora. She fears the girl is pregnant to a married man. Abandoned by their families and communities, fallen women at the edge of the world often resort to desperate measures.
I felt certain from her manner she meditated suicide.
Sydney's a rough port and frontier town. Boozing and brawling are rife. Crime out of control. In the hope of attracting more women, Britain introduces free passage for single girls. Hundreds arrive. But there's nowhere for them to live, and few jobs.
I can't imagine what those poor young women would have thought to get off the boat and arrive in the colonies. And it would have been like the Wild West. It would have been just such a shock to the system.
If the colony is to become a country, it needs children raised in families. What Caroline Chisholm does will change the lives of thousands of young women and transform Australia for generations to come. For some, the new arrivals are a windfall. Brothel madams looking for working girls pose as respectable women searching for domestic staff. Caroline aims to get there first.
One of the problems for these women was they were alone, they were young, they were financially vulnerable, and therefore people preying on their innocence could hit their target quite easily.
Flora.
Caroline first met Flora only a few months ago.
Wait here, I'm going to come back for you. Flora? On my first visit to the immigrants' barracks, my attention became fixed on a young and beautiful Highland girl. The arm of a gentleman was around her waist.
Flora! Are you a mother?
If Flora's pregnant and ends up a single mother, her options are radically curtailed. She's maybe going to be a laundress at best, or a prostitute, and her future in the colony isn't that good.
Caroline finds Flora a home and a job. There are hundreds of girls like Flora in the colony, and little or no help for them. Caroline has a bold idea. She establishes Australia's first employment agency for young women.
You must be Lily. Welcome.
She gets them jobs as servants in good homes across the rapidly expanding colony. From there, they often meet men and marry. Caroline will only place girls with families she trusts.
I think she may suit my wife.
She is too young. She is too pretty and inexperienced for your house.
And pray, madam, what do you know of me?
All that Flora told me.
Good day. Good day.
In an era when women hold little influence, Caroline is revolutionary.
Now, girls.
She was an extraordinary woman. In many ways, changed the face of Australia because of the opportunities that were given to young women, particularly.
As a young girl myself, to look at our history and these women who lived in a day and age where they really didn't have a lot of rights. They weren't allowed to vote, and yet they still stood up for what they believed in.
Within 3 years, Caroline finds homes and jobs for 11,000 young women, an average of 70 every week. Almost single-handedly, she changes the social fabric of Australia from a raw frontier land into a nation built by mums and dads and kids.
I think the fact that she took on the plight of all these young women, Caroline Chisholm, in a way, became the mother of Australia.
Today, more than 1 million Australians can trace their ancestry to Caroline Chisholm's girls. The society she helps engineer will enter a new era of unprecedented wealth. Australia is set to become one of the richest countries on Earth. September 10, 1851. Yarrawee Valley, Victoria, 100 kilometres west of Melbourne. Australia's population and wealth are about to skyrocket because of one man, James Esmond. Stagecoach driver, prospector, has the luck of the Irish. He seeks his fortune in the earth.
Mining, and gold mining in particular, has always had an extraordinary allure. There is nothing like it to motivate people.
Small amounts of gold have already been discovered in New South Wales. Now diggers hunt in Victoria.
Hey, boss, there's someone coming.
Blacksmith James Oddie, first to stake a claim in the Yarrawee Valley. He and his men work what they think is the most likely place to strike it rich.
I'm thinking this would be a nice spot to set up. How do you do? The name's Esmond. James Esmond.
This ground's taken.
We thought we might be neighbours.
You thought.
With the possibility of great wealth comes fierce competition.
So it's like that, is it?
At the dawn of the gold rush, there's little law and order. Prospectors have their own methods of resolving disputes.
We didn't have a very good start as a nation. The first mob that came and settled were crooks and con men. The next that came were greedy, avaricious gamblers who wanted some gold. So it's a wonder we turned out at all decent. Maybe we haven't.
Enough! I'm sure these gentlemen have taken the point.
Well, come on, lads, we'll look elsewhere.
We might try up the hill near our tents.
Okay, right neighbourly of you. Come on, lads.
Diggers believe most gold lies close to creeks and rivers. Esmond and his crew must retreat to higher ground, to land considered much less likely to contain gold. A few hundred metres away, they set up camp and dig.
Honey, look.
Esmond's misfortune is about to pay off.
Fellas, get some water.
It's a huge 250-gram nugget of pure gold.
Would you take a look at that? Would you look at the size of it? Quick, fella!
Unknowingly, Oddie has directed his rival to the tip of the motherlode. In the 1850s, a third of the world's gold supply will come from Victoria. Over 2 days, Esmond and his mates dig out 27 kilograms of gold.
Would you look at the shine on it?
They start scratching and there is gold. They start panning and there is gold. Kookaburras poo in their eye, it's gold. It's a golden valley. And they try to keep it secret for as long as they can, but pretty soon the word gets out and they come from everywhere.
A tent town erupts around Esmond's diggings. It will become the wealthy city of Ballarat. A construction boom begins. New railways connect Melbourne to gold towns, like Bendigo and Castlemaine. Melbourne overtakes Sydney as the biggest and richest city in Australia.
Melbourne is one of the great cities of the empire within 20 or 30 years of its beginnings because it is built on wealth, gold wealth.
Lured by the chance to strike it rich, hundreds of thousands of prospectors flood Victoria. In less than a decade, its population rockets from 25,000 to more than 500,000. The world's greatest population explosion, driven by gold. For 40 years, miners strike gold around the continent. It makes Australia one of the richest places on Earth and brings here people from every part of the world for the first time.
We have immigrants here from 150 nations of the world, over 210 different communities. And it began with the gold rush. The gold rush actually bleeds into a whole lot of things we're now really proud of. It did start with a supercharged lottery, gold mania.
Despite the gold rush and the enormous wealth it brings, the outside world of electronic communications stops on Australia's doorstep. July 1862, the Northern Territory, 1,500 kilometres from Adelaide, and racing to become the first European to cross the continent and survive is John McDowell Stuart. Thirsty, exhausted, risking his life to forge a path for the telegraph wire that will connect Australia to the world. He's already tried and failed twice.
There's some incredible Australian explorers, but one of the most extraordinary was John McDowell Stuart, because he kept attempting to try and go from, in effect, the southernmost bit of Australia, Adelaide, to Darwin. He was the ultimate Aussie explorer as far as I'm concerned.
This is the age of exploration and communication. The world has the electric telegraph, a global network of cables for sending instant messages. But the wires stop just north of Australia.
Before the telegraph, if you want to get a message to London, you have to write it on a piece of paper. It has to be put on a ship and taken all the way to London. It takes months. And then it takes months for the reply to get back. But the moment you create electronic information with the twisting of two bits of wire together, the world has changed forever.
If the telegraph is to reach the new cities, it must span the continent from north to south, over a merciless landscape that turns back or kills every white man who tries to cross it. In less than 2 years, 4 expeditions attempt to cross Australia. It's the amazing race of the 19th century. Only a few months earlier, Stuart's great rivals, Burke and Wills, make it from Melbourne to the Gulf of Carpentaria. Their expedition is lavishly funded and equipped, but on the way home, they die of sickness and hunger. John Stuart is 3 months out of Adelaide and still 1,800 kilometres from the Northern Sea. He's in the dead heart of the continent, on punishing terrain and in crippling heat. With every step, they're further away from safety.
When the Australian explorers and settlers journey inland, by and large they journey into drier and harsher country. Country that seems to say, you don't belong here. A country that wants to drive you back. And Stuart's great achievement is that he pushes into the zone which we could think of as the zone of silence and of death.
No rain seems to have fallen here for a length of time. We have not seen a bird, nor heard the chirrup of any to disturb the gloomy silence.
Stuart has explored Central Australia for more than 15 years. He's learnt to travel light and strictly ration dehydrated food. Their biggest enemy is thirst. To stay alive, they must constantly find new sources of water.
Come on, lads. On top. We'll keep moving north.
It's a task that doesn't fall to Stuart alone. He understands he's crossing harsh, remote, but not empty country. Since the British arrived in Australia more than 70 years ago, contact with Indigenous Australians often ends in bloodshed. But Stuart looks to the locals for help, especially about where to find water.
When white men went out and successfully found their way across vast tracts of country, you'll often find it was because they had really good relationships and knew how to interact with the Aboriginal people along the way.
Once Stuart finds a water source, he travels out and back, up to a dozen times, in search of the next creek or spring. Only then does he move on. It's an exhausting way to explore. After 5 months, they've travelled over 3,000 kilometres, but they're close to the limits of their endurance.
He was an extraordinary bushman, the most incredible perseverance, and he was able to motivate the fellow explorers that went with him.
But as Stuart and his men struggle north, they're at their limit. They're running out of food. The horses are sick. The water bags leak, and the mercury nudges 50 degrees. Yet Stuart continues to pit his toughness against the bush, the desert, and distance. And then,
Schlat!
a sound they've heard before.
Lads! Lads! Lads, it's a sea! Go!
3,500 kilometres of desert, 6 months in the saddle, and Stuart gallops the beaches of the Timor Sea. He's the first European to cross Australia from Adelaide to what will become Darwin.
I have tried all my life to do this, and now have succeeded.
Stuart is a master map maker, and his charts will guide him and his men home. On the very same day as Burke and Will's funeral in Melbourne, John Stuart will ride the streets of Adelaide, triumphant.
The tyranny of distance. It's laid at the foundation of some of modern Australia's great successes. The telegraph line that Stuart surveyed across the continent was part of that enterprise of trying to conquer the tyranny of distance. I think it's a quintessential Australian characteristic, and it's one area where we excel.
An army of workers soon follows Stuart's path. They build the world's longest continuous overland telegraph line from Adelaide to the Timor Sea. It takes 2 years, 36,000 poles, 3,000 kilometres of wire stretched across the continent. Repeater stations will become the settlements of Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, and Katherine. Now, events in London are news in Melbourne, not in months, but in hours.
What an impact it would have made on their lives. And then suddenly all this information was available quickly because transport services still weren't that fast then. You know, the world didn't move at a quick pace then. So the availability of instant information would have had a huge impact on people.
Australia is wired to the world, and with the flick of a switch, everything changes. Lightning-fast communication, the newly rich economy, and a shorter working day means now it's time to play. June 5, 1869, Richmond, Melbourne. The Melbourne Football Club clashes with Her Majesty's troops. The soldiers wear red sashes. The battle's been fought for almost 2 hours, and it's a dead heat. 0-0.
Pick it up! Kick the ball!
One of the founders of football in Australia.
What's wrong with you?
Tom Wills, famous cricketer, desperate for the win.
Use the space! Go!
Success against the British will help him promote Victorian rules football and lay the foundations of a uniquely Australian sport.
When you sit and watch a match and you see all the elements that I think make a great country, in many ways are played out on a football field.
Let's keep it up!
The clock's running down, and Tom Wills calls for tactics which require a skill that will come to define this sport.
Use the width of the field! Kick the ball! Kick it over the top!
The mark. "20 years earlier, Tom saw his first high mark. His neighbours, boys from the Jabwarang and Jadwajali people, play a game called Man Gruk. Indigenous Australians play different versions all over the continent.
It's awesome to know that Aussie rules might have derived from Man Gruk, a traditional game that Aboriginal people used to play where they used to fill a possum skin up with charcoal and there'd be 50 on each side. And they'd kick it and hand pass it and throw it and mark it all day long, sometimes over 3 or 4 days.
What he sees will stay with Tom Wills for the rest of his life.
I think it's going to keep them on their feet as well.
12 years later, Wills is one of Australia's most famous sportsmen. He's captain of the Victorian cricket team.
We need to devise a game of our own, a game that supports grown men on harder ground.
The cricket players need a new sport in winter, a game they can play in the wet.
If we make the field bigger, we have 20 men on either side.
Wills went to school in England. He played rugby and soccer was everywhere. But Wills wants a new Australian game with the best action from each sport. And he remembers the moves he saw in Man Gruk.
A handball style.
It's got a little bit of soccer, a little bit of Gaelic, a little bit of rugby, and you know, like I think that's why Aussies love it. It's a bit of a mongrel sport, a bit of a combo of everything, and that's how we are as Aussies.
We remove the crossbar and make 2 smaller posts either side. Maybe make the field an oval shape.
Yes, agreed. They put their signatures to 10 key rules. At this moment, what will become Aussie rules footy is born. And the timing is perfect. The economy's booming, wages soar, and there's more time to play. In Melbourne, workers have locked in an 8-hour day, while British workers still do up to 16. Australia is known around the world as the working man's paradise. Before the good times, only rich people played sport. Now, it's for everyone.
They weren't the privileged darlings of society. They were ordinary working men. Therefore, they couldn't lose their wages by having to take time off from a violent and vigorous game of footy. So it had to have rules.
Before the rule book, games were an excuse for a punch-up. 40 players aside, no refs, no boundaries. The brawling might go on for days. But even when it gets organised, the first proper footy games are still rough. On this winter day, back in 1869, Tom Wills looks to his cousin and team captain, Henry Harrison. He's one of Melbourne's best and toughest.
Football is essentially a rough game all the world over, and it is not suitable for men poodles and milksops.
It's still 0-0. The Aussies finally see their chance.
Go! Go!
The Victorians beat the British soldiers 1-0. Their pride in their team and their game will echo around Australia.
Got the bastards in the end.
I played AFL. I'm proud of the sport. I'm proud of what it taught me before I got into the world of golf. So at the end of the day, we actually embraced it because it was ours. Australian football is Australian football.
The game grows and spreads through the southern and western colonies. In a decade, the Victorian Football League kicks off. Every generation produces its own football heroes. In 1990, VFL becomes a national code and an Australian obsession.
And then off the step to fall forward. Big fly, Bird, good. Could he roll it through? He can!
The biggest thing I love about football is the opportunities to play something that's so fun and inclusive. So many different shapes and sizes of people can play this game. It doesn't discriminate against where you come from, what team you follow, what religion you follow.
Every year, the game inspires more than 7 million footy fans to barrack for their teams around Australia.
As a nation, we can say that this is our game. I think it's the most exciting game in the world to watch. There's a haphazardness about it. It's high scoring, it's combative, there's a million things that I love about it. A game that we proudly say is the greatest in the world.
Sport, culture and commerce flourish in gold-rich cities like Melbourne. But gold fever is about to reach boiling point.
I'm not letting this happen anymore.
In a battle over mining licenses. November 1854, Ballarat, 115 kilometres west of Melbourne. 3 years after James Esmond hits pay dirt, prospectors from around the world still flock to Victoria's goldfields. Melbourne is deserted. All but 2 of its 40 police quit to dig for gold.
Hey, Tommy.
Mining with his cousin Tom and his cousin's wife Bridget is John Hines. Fresh off the boat from Ireland, believes in justice and freedom for all, about to take part in an armed rebellion that will be crucial to the rise of Australian democracy.
I think we should think of the gold miners as the backpackers of the 19th century. They are young, they are idealistic, they have an extraordinary sense of adventure, and they are people who are schooled in the most progressive, idealistic ideas that are coming out of Europe. They are Democrats, and they're not about to be bossed around by a military governor.
Because they don't own land, most miners can't vote.
Got your licence?
And they hate the government's new mining tax. To dig, miners must have a licence, and it's not cheap, a quarter of the average wage.
Oi.
Not everyone strikes it rich on the goldfields.
Where's your licence?
Most barely make ends meet. But the government demands its money, whether the diggers find gold or not.
It wasn't a tax on their labour, it was a tax on their presence. And like all poll taxes in history, it was enormously unpopular.
The police crack down on miners who can't or won't buy a licence. Their brutality and the tax's unfairness
I'm not letting this happen anymore.
infuriate miners like John Hines.
He's got a family.
And unify the diggers against the government.
Until we had a common enemy in terms of a brutal government taking money that you didn't have, perhaps that's what galvanised people to have a sense of inclusion, you know, and a sense of cohesiveness that maybe was lacking until then.
In an act of defiance, the miners burn their licences. They band together.
Let's go, boys. We need more woodmen.
And arm themselves.
Right.
The diggers build a rough fortress. It will become known as the Eureka Stockade. The British Army still defends the Australian colonies. The government sends in the troops.
When the government tries to push down, this time the Liberal activists stand back to back, build a stockade around them and say, come and get us, you bastards.
They raise their own flag, the Southern Cross.
I don't want anyone to get through the wall. We need more woodmen.
A symbol of Australia's place under the stars. To the government, it's an act of rebellion it will not tolerate. December 3, 1854, 3 a.m. The miners have been holed up in their stockade for 3 days. 276 soldiers and police take up positions around it. Captain John Wellesley Thomas's orders take the rebels by surprise and crush the resistance.
Redcock!
A ragtag bunch of barely trained miners
Get your guns, lads! Take aim!
versus the might of the British military machine.
Fire! Keep your head down!
Among the 150 rebels, John Hines. For the first time, Australians take up arms against the Crown
Get the gunpowder!
in pursuit of democratic rights.
Watch your left! Fire!
What's most stunning about the descriptions of the attack is the kind of bloodlust with which those troopers took on those men. It's like one of those scenes that you see on the television of a protest that just goes horribly wrong.
Despite the firepower and ferocity of the soldiers, the miners hold on. They kill 6 troops. But John Hines falls, along with 21 of his mates, and the Eureka Stockade. In the morning, the troops hunt down the survivors. Bridget Hines searches in vain for John. Like all of Australia, she's appalled by the carnage. But she and her children will live to see the miners' sacrifice is not in vain.
The Eureka Stockade was our French Revolution moment, you know, liberty, equality, fraternity.
In the wake of Eureka, the colonies reinvent themselves. The government scraps the mining licenses. Victoria and South Australia become the first places in the empire where all British men over the age of 21 get the right to vote.
Victoria becomes the most democratic place in the world because not even in Britain can men without property vote.
We led democracy because of the Eureka Stockade. Australia became the light on the hill for all of those liberal democracies around the world who looked at what Australia was achieving We led the world in democratic reforms.
Eureka shows that the men and women of Australia refused to put up with unjust rules forced upon them. A trait that will come to define them as the colonies become a nation.